Hello everyone, thank you to the organisers for inviting me here, and it's a real honour to be here in Paris. Vocalise, the organisation I work for, is an access organisation that works to increase opportunities for blind and partially sighted people to experience and enjoy the arts and cultural heritage in the UK. Each year, with our network of audio describers, consultants and trainers, we work on around 180 audio described performances at around between 75 and 100 theatres across the UK, and we work on around 30 or 40 access projects at museums, galleries and heritage sites. Many of these museum projects involve training staff in visual awareness, guiding and audio description, and supporting them to design programs for blind and partially sighted visitors to their venues. We believe passionately that descriptive language and guided touch can bring art to life just as powerfully as visual observation. And we believe that blind and partially sighted people can get as much meaning, pleasure, and epiphany from the live experience of being in front of art as a sighted person. Digital is, of course, important. We produce for our theatre programme, we produce recorded audio introductions for each audio-described play. These provide a general introduction to the performance, including description of the set, the costumes, and the characters, as well as practical and descriptive information about the theatre itself. Because when you go as a sighted person, when you go to the theatre and you see a play, the minute the curtain goes up, you can take in everything. You know that it's a modern performance. You know what the characters are wearing. You take in a huge amount of information within those initial moments. That information that needs to be given in advance to a blind or partially sighted person so that they can start the play on an equal footing. We take that concept and we encourage museums to offer a similar audio-described introduction to their venue. And with an organisation called the Art Fund, we produce a recorded introduction for each of the shortlisted museums for their annual Museum of the Year award. We also develop longer recorded audio descriptive guides for museum exhibitions and galleries, and I promise we voice, when they're recorded, they're voiced by professionals with very engaging and non-boring voices. And Jacques on the panel this morning was lamenting the dull recorded audio descriptive guides at museums, and it's noted that we always have to do our best to make them engaging. We use a variety of hardware to deliver our audio guides, from traditional devices with physical keypads to smartphones with interfaces using text-to-speech software. We also encourage venues to make their audio descriptive content available to stream or download so that people can use their own device and take control of their own listening. I want to now talk to you about a project we did last year, which looked at the access information online that museums provide. And we did this by an audit of all 1,700 UK museum websites. And we got a group of about 20 volunteers to each look at 100 museum websites. And it's based on the premise that a lack of access information for disabled visitors means that there will be lower attendance at the museum. Because using the website is a vital step in the decision-making process for many people. How do I get there? How do I get around? Will it be worth the effort? Can I access the art when I get there? What about the cafe, the shop? Without answers to these questions before the visit, people are less likely to make their visit. And so here are some, just want to say something. When museum websites first came online in the 90s, access was mainly considered in terms of physical access for wheelchair users. And over time, museums have begun considering access needs more broadly. But for many museums, this is still very superficial, and the only recognition that they've thought about blind or partially sighted people is the presence of the phrase, "guide dogs are welcome." I went online recently to kind of research this slide, and for every guide dog in the UK, there are only 4,000 guide dogs in the UK, and for every guide dog unit, there are 72 blind or partially sighted people who doesn't have a guide dog. And what we're trying to do is to make museums, instead of just writing "guide dogs are welcome" on their website, which doesn't really mean much because it's a legal requirement to welcome guide dogs, we want them to start thinking about people and what resources the people need who either own the dog or don't have a dog. And so this is the result of our audit of around 1,700 museums. 27% of museums have no access information at all. So that's 1/4 of museums. A further 43% of museums have access information but make no mention of blind or partially sighted people. So that's 70% of museums are not catering for blind and partially sighted people. There's no welcome, no indication. That only leaves 30%, 3 in every 10 museums. We look into it further, and only 16% of museum websites mention having large print labels or guides that they offer. And I'm not going to read through all of my slides because it will be available online in the proceedings. But the regional range across the UK ranges hugely, from only 2% of museums in Northern Ireland up to 34% in London museums. And London is skewed because it's the home of all the large national museums that are well funded and should be doing good things anyway. So that's 16% with large print. 7% of museums are offering Braille. I should say I find these figures shockingly low. And 9% of museums offer audio-described or touch tours, and 4% of museums have recorded audio-descriptive guides. We also published, as well as this, I think that the expression carrot and stick is the same in France as it is in England, where this was the stick, where we told the sector how poorly they were performing. But we also provided a carrot and produced a set of guidelines to encourage and support them how to improve their access information. Museums who should be the best at image description cannot seem to even do alt tags online. I'm going to talk about online accessibility now and follow and kind of touch on some of the things Lauren was saying. And you know, it is quite incredible that very few museums, almost no museums that I know of, have proper image description online, let alone doing just the basic alt tags, and then video as well. And then now we're already in the era where virtual reality and other augmented reality things are emerging with no discussion about accessibility. I mean, there may be a discussion among us, but not in the mainstream. Museums need to start providing descriptions for their collections online. And there is a need for far more widely available guidelines to help people. I was looking in kind of academic literature to see if there was anything, and I found a really good set of headings from the academic Gisèle Neves, is a Portuguese academic, and this is a really helpful framework based on answering a series of questions. What sort of a guide is in place. In other words, thinking about your description in terms of the method of delivery or reception. Is it live? Is it recorded? Is it provided in audio, or is it provided in text that is read on the page or listened to? So it's the kind of delivery method. What type of artifact or space is to be described? Where is the listener in relation to what is described? Are they in front of the original? Are they remote from the original? Are they using? Are they in front of a facsimile? What's the context to what is being featured? Is it an object in a case, or is it an artifact in its original space, which is also a historic monument, for example? What are the specificities of what's being featured, the characteristics and affordances of what is being described? What's the aim? What will the listener do with that information? Is it part of a wider thing that you're trying to, a wider concept that you're trying to engage them with? And then and finally, which is normally the one we concern ourselves with, what is the linguistic or stylistic approach that's being used to convey the description? I want to talk about multisensory language. It's we often, when you first explain audio description to someone, you often who's not familiar with it, they often kind of worry that, well, how can I describe something that's visual to someone who doesn't have sight? And they get very hung up on the visual, and they forget that sight is one of a whole load, I think at least 12 senses that we have, and that you can do very well describing an object in relation to all the other senses and not need to worry about the visual. The visual kind of is often the least important thing about something. For example, a description of a painting that shows a maritime scene or a seascape could include alluding to the waves lapping on the sides of boats, spray whipped up and crashing over a jetty, trees on the shore are bent by the wind. All of those can be related to the lived experience, the sensory experience through touch, hearing, balance, and even taste. We're involved in a research project with the University of Westminster and the Museum of London and the RNIB it's testing audio description about a group of objects at the Museum of London, and we're preparing 3 different audio described texts for each object, and then we're testing these with a group of users, and they're sighted people and people who have visual impairments, and after playing them the audio, we give them a set of questions testing their memory and what's their reaction to the audio description and to the images. And then a month later, we ask them the same questions and see what's happened to their memory of not only the objects, but also the language that they use. And then we can look at that in relation to the language that was used with the audio description. The research isn't over yet, so I can't tell you what the results were, but early reports show that there's some very interesting stuff there in terms of the use of multisensory language, where that helps you, it fix it in people's memory, and they have a much better recall. The other thing I was going to talk about was Coyote, and I'm showing you a slide. It's an odd name. It comes from an old Hopi story about how the coyote got its yellow eyes. My slide shows an image that the museum used for the project, a coyote sitting on its haunches in a field of wheat, and the orange-yellow of the coyote's fur and eyes matching the wheat. The thing I'm not going to repeat what Lauren told about the project, but the thing I found really interesting is that in the end, they're going to give the user the option to have more than one description so they can choose which description they prefer. So 2 or 3 different people might have written a description about the same image. And if you as a user go, well, I like that description, I want you to show me, I want you to give me next time I access an image, I want the description by that person because I like the way. So it's not only gathering from the crowd, but it's giving the user those options, which I think is very exciting. And I'm very excited about how how the model can be taken up by other museums, and particularly in the UK. My last point I want to touch on is video, and this is something museums are using video, and if they aren't, they should be, because it's a fantastically engaging means of communication. There's probably not enough video being used, and I have a 12-year-old son, and it's his main medium, and I know that for young people, YouTube is their search engine, not Google, and I think museums need to notice this demographic change. Now, museums are often put off video because they know that you can caption videos for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but they don't quite understand what to do for audio description. There's no straightforward technical solution. There is this thing, this American non-profit organization that has launched something called UDescribe, which is at udescribe.org, which allows synchronous audio description track to be added to a YouTube video. I'm not quite sure how it works, and I haven't talked to them yet. I also noticed there are no described videos on their site matching the keyword museum, so museums aren't yet using it. But hopefully this is one step further to this becoming more used for web videos, and that Google take the lead and actually make it, embed it as a default thing in YouTube. But meanwhile, it is totally possible to make accessible video for short videos by actually considering blind and partially sighted people in the design process, and making your video work audio only, making sure that the film is audio-led. Speakers introduce themselves, say who they are, or introduce each other. The location and other important visual information is mentioned or described as part of the dialogue and the voice. And this is totally possible to be done elegantly and unobtrusively and inclusively, without the need for commissioning a whole separate audio described track. So there's a lot of challenges, and I haven't even begun to look at virtual reality. It seems to me we have a long way to go. Museums have barely started, and I hope we can all do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. So I know we're at the time the session was due to finish, but as we started a bit late, I'm getting nods here, so we do have time for a few questions if anyone has any that they'd like to ask either Lauren or Matthew. Yes, I don't know if you have a microphone to get over to the gentleman, just to help the translators to be able to hear. Looks like we do. Here we go.
Hi,
okay.
Gowan Hewitt from Drake Music. Very quick question. I'd find it very useful to have that list you just gave us, Matthew, of how to use audio description within video making. That's very useful information.
Yeah, let's chat with you afterwards. And yeah, I'm sure there are more things to think about, but I'd be very interested. We just made a short promotional video about Vocalize, and we went through that process and then tested it before finalising it with a few of our people, blind or partially sighted people who on our team to test that, and it is straightforward.
I love it. This idea of the accessibility of access, of building accessibility into the art, I think is really powerful. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthew, for the answer. Any more questions? Yes, thank you. Stand in the front.
Je n'ai pas bien compris si vous avez ça professionnellement les trois voix ou si c'est une étude. Si c'est une étude expérimentale qui a un temps limité, qu'il y ait trois regards différents, ou si c'est quelque chose que vous avez mis en place.
My lovely friend Katie to help with the translation.
Les trois descriptions différentes, et on peut choisir l'utilisateur, le descripteur qu'on souhaite.
Okay. Yes, the screen.
Yes, Matthew, the lady was asking whether you have a choice of 3 different descriptions for the Coyote project.
No, that's the three different descriptions were for our project with the University of Westminster. That's the one, yeah. Yeah, that is a fixed project for a short period of time.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yes?
Rebonjour et merci déjà à vous, Mathieu. Je suis malvoyant et comme vous, je suis très intéressé à la description de l'art pour être comment dire ça, très curieux quand je vais au théâtre, au cinéma. Donc cette question sur la description, et notamment si vous avez parlé par exemple de donc, description des images, donc au niveau des photos ou par vidéo. Vous avez aussi abordé, si je ne me trompe pas, si j'ai écouté un peu, pareil pour les sites internet des musées. Moi, la question que je me pose, c'est si demain je vais au British Museum, parce que j'aimerais y aller vraiment, ou au musée du Louvre, je ne me suis pas posé la question pour le musée du Louvre à Paris, par exemple. Est-ce qu'il y a ces systèmes de description sur le site? Je n'ai pas vérifié. Est-ce que, voilà, donc il y a cette question. Et ce qui m'a paru aussi intéressant et très intéressant, parce que ça me rappelle une discussion que j'ai eue avec des collègues qui sont entre guillemets valides, hein, comme on dit dans notre jargon ordinaire, on peut voir différemment. Et notamment la question de la description, c'est-à-dire comment amener les personnes lambda à comprendre qu'on peut voir autrement que juste par les yeux, quoi. Voilà.
When we produce an audio description with a museum, it is written by one person, but then it is edited by two more people, and so there's one of whom is blind or partially sighted, and will walk round the exhibition or the gallery with the other editor and listen to the description and ask questions and feedback. So there's a collaborative process that goes into each audio description. It isn't just one person. I mean, it is primarily one person's description, but then it is worked on so that we kind of check and feedback on each other's work and collaborate. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, any more questions? Time for one or two more, maybe? I can't see. Oh, yes, there is. There we go. One more. Thank you. Thank you, Ross.
It's a question for Lauren. It's Ross Parry from University of Leicester. I'm interested to know more about the complex layers that are affecting the way you make JSTOR accessible, and if you can kind of help us to understand these a little bit, because looking at it from a university perspective, so I work in a university and I teach in a university, we're seeing our students coming with ever more complex and connected devices and multiple devices that they bring into the classroom and use in the classroom. We see the universities building more integrated information ecosystems. So my university has a full Microsoft ecosystem. Then we have the companies that offer our content management system, our virtual learning environment. In our case, it's Blackboard, building in yet more functionality. So even before the learner has got to that article, has got to that document in JSTOR, there's multiple levels of assistive technology and in some ways competing pieces of software wanting to make things accessible. So how are you visualizing that? How are you responding to that? What changes are you seeing in those different orbits?
Well, that's actually a wonderful question, because access to our material is incredibly complicated, and it's definitely like the #1 question we get from students. I want an article, but I have no idea if my library can give it to me. And there's an increase of discovery services as well. So each library, sometimes several libraries within the same institution might have different discovery services. By discovery service, I mean a portal that sort of connects to every source that they might have. So JSTOR, you know, something from Elsevier, like all these like online publishers. And we're doing our best to connect with those services as well as we can. We're focusing more so on making our website accessible and making sure that the content, once the student gets it, is as accessible as possible. It is still kind of new territory, though, figuring out how to, you know, make sure that everyone who gets through a discovery service has the best experience that they possibly can. And we do work with some partners on that, but it is still a little bit in progress, I would say. And again, we're focusing on what we can control, but again, doing our best to be like the best possible partner we can to those services when they are able to work with us. Yes.
If you'd like a best possible university partner to work with to figure it
Great.
out,
Wonderful.
do give us a call. We would love to have that conversation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for the questions. We're just a few minutes over time, but I think we'll aim to come back after coffee at the same time at 4:45. No coffee? Okay, all right, okay. We'll come back after the break, sorry, at quarter to 4. And thank you, Lauren and Matthew, for really interesting presentations.
Thank you.